Hi students. Okay, so we are moving on to the next step of your project. You have completed your rubbings. Hopefully you have some rubbings that you really like. Once you do this next step, if you choose to glue down the tinfoil, you won't be able to complete any more rubbings in the same way. So take time with the rubbing phase and get a couple rubbings that you really like because this will permanently change it. If you don't glue the tinfoil down, you can of course take the tinfoil back off again and you can make more rubbings. I did not glue my tinfoil down yet, but I probably will in order to complete the last step. So here are the materials you'll need for the collagraph. Once again, I don't know how to do text. So here they are. Collagraph is the word I'm saying. It's a type of print where you build up some different materials and textures on top of the printing plate and pull the prints from them. Because they're adhered to the printing plate, it's not a monotype. You can keep pulling a print from this and get the same design over and over and over. You might change your colors, but you're going to be able to pull more than one print. You'll need tinfoil. I'm just using, basic aluminum foil. It doesn't have to be anything fancy. It doesn't have to be heavy. If it's super flimsy, it might be a problem, but tinfoil is tinfoil for this particular project. Glue. This is going to be if you want to glue the tinfoil down to your plate. Once again, you don't have to, but it might be super helpful. Parents, if you're helping, you can of course help decide that. Brush. Just, any kind of brush. This brush, one brush is going to be to help you smear the glue out because you don't want a glue line. Another brush would be if you're doing the watercolor or to smear your water on. So one way or the other, you're going to need brushes, and there's different phases for the brushes. The sponge or the sprayer, so I have these little sprayers. They started as hair products, but I use them to mist my indoor plants. If you have a mister, that's going to work really well. Otherwise, if you don't have a sprayer, it's fine. I also got really good success from a clean sponge. You're going to be wetting it with a little bit of water, but you don't want it to be like super dirty, and you don't want it to have like Cloroxy products already built into it because you're going to be touching them, you're going to be putting them on your paper, like clean sponge. Also, was able to use a wet brush to wet the paper. So if you don't have a sprayer, which is helpful, and if you don't have a sponge, which is helpful, you can of course also just use a brush to put clean water on your paper. Paper, you're gonna need paper. Oh my goodness, here. I'm still using computer paper. If you have good quality paper, like say something out of a sketchbook, this would be a good time to start to use that paper, but I would do a couple rough drafts on the computer paper first before I start using up the good paper, because this process requires, like you might get a great print off your first one, but you might learn a little something with each print. So maybe waiting until you're confident would be a good idea for your good paper, because good paper is kind of expensive. Sorry, I forgot the water and container. I'm just using like an old food container. If you, anything lying around will work. Obviously a cup or a bowl will work, but you're going to be putting watercolor in it, so you'll want to clean it up when it's done. And we're going to need washable markers. It should say washable on it. You really don't want them to be permanent. You want them to be able to come off pretty easy with the water. Crayola's fine. Any kind of brand that's washable is fine. They should all be, pretty loose on the tinfoil, especially. It's not an absorbent surface. Some of the marker colors, when I was playing around with this, beaded up on the tinfoil, and some of them didn't. I don't know why some did and some didn't. They were all the same brand. So having a couple different markers is not a bad idea, as you might get better luck with one over another. And then I also played around with using watercolor for this. Let me see there. Washable. I think all watercolor is washable. I don't know why this says it on here. I think they're just trying to really help parents out, let them know watercolor doesn't stain, but watercolor really doesn't stain. And with both of these things, you'll be able to put the marker or the watercolor on your tinfoil and not have to worry about pulling these prints while they're still wet. The water applied to the paper is going to be what reactivates your pigment. I also had these, tissue and a Q-tip. These might be helpful for getting into the crevices of your design to push the tinfoil in and to blot the back of the paper as you're pulling the print. So these don't hurt. They're not mandatory, but they don't hurt. All right, I'm going to let you gather these materials together, and then I'll move you on to the next step. Okay, so I have my board, my tinfoil. This piece will fit over it and with room to wrap around the edges. I have a whole bunch of colored markers, all washable so that I can, play and mix colors if I want to. Yes, if you mix colors, it will get on the end of your marker. No, I don't think it'll permanently destroy your marker. But, if that's not your thing, you'll keep your colors separate. And I have some water in a little container and a brush for wetting my paper after I build my board. So the first thing is getting the tinfoil on the board. Now, if you were doing the glue option, and like I said, I'm not doing it just yet, but I want to tell you about it. You would not want glue lines to show up on your paper. That's something like water on my finger. It's gross. So you would want to smear an even distribution of glue on your board before you stick this down. And when you stick it down, if you're doing it with glue, you would want to stick it down in a way where you don't force a wrinkle. So parents, if you're helping, you would either start at an edge and go up, start at a corner and go over, or sometimes it's easy to start in the middle and press out. It's really up to you, but you would want all areas of your board to be glued over the whole thing. That's why it's helpful to have a brush to kind of smear the glue around before you put the tinfoil on. I'm just going to tinfoil. So I'm going to start by pushing down on my tinfoil to sort of find my raised areas and find my edges. I need enough tinfoil to wrap around the back and hold it in place. You want to make sure that you really get into everything. You will be able to do this more after you curl it over. So to wrap it over, and when you're wrapping it, you really want to keep your tinfoil on. You don't want to wrap it and come back and find that you've moved the whole thing. So for me, I'm going to slide this a little bit off the table and wrap. Can you even see what I'm doing? Not really, right? Yeah, let me see if you can see what I'm doing. And wrap this edge over and fold under. Okay. Now, I'm going to do the same thing to this one. Now that I have this to hold it on, it gets a little easier. And then I'm going to do this. If you are gluing, it's a great idea to seal these down with glue once you are sure that you have it flat and attached in the front. So I would really develop the front fully first, then go back on the back with the glue and glue these down because you don't want this peeling up. Now you're going to find all these little areas of your image. This is what the Q-tip was for. So if you do have a Q-tip or something useful, like small, soft on the edge, a super dull pencil may work. I don't know. I don't think I trust it. It might go through your tinfoil. You want something really soft. It can help you find the edges of your picture. Once I have this done, I'm going to come back and show you how to do the marker. Okay, hold on. So I finished this, and you can see my drawing. All the indentations are clear, and that's going to allow me to put the color in the right place. It isn't really for the rubbing this time, it's really for the coloring. And now when you go to put the color on the tinfoil, once again, you're using a washable marker, and you're going to kind of place it where you want the colors to go. So if I want these little flowery things to be red, I can start there with some red. It doesn't mean that it's going to be the only color that I put there, but for start, it's a good base. And then if I want this area to be like a green grass, I'm using the side of the marker. I don't know if that's easy to see, but I'm using like the long broad edge so that I get as much color placed as possible. Now, you might be able to see that the color's kind of beading up, and that's really okay. Sometimes it does that, and sometimes it doesn't, and I'll be honest, I don't know why. But I've done it enough times with it happening to know that it's not that big of a deal. The other thing that helps is continuing to go over it. So as I layer colors, that tends to start to dry and stick a little bit, and then I get better coverage the more layers I add. So I'm going to put some green here, and I'm going to put some green here. And then I'm going to add some to my trees and my sky and my clouds. So I know a lot of times students would want white clouds and a blue sky, and I'm going to add more to this, but let me just talk about the clouds for a second. Areas that are white for this particular collagraph would have to be crisp, clean edges in order to make any sense. So if I just leave my clouds white and I don't get full coverage for my trees or my sky, those will just look like undeveloped areas and they won't really read as clouds. You can go around the outside of the cloud with like maybe a light gray, and then that would make the cloud appear deliberate. But what I'm going to do is put either sunset colors in my clouds or gray in my clouds to make them really stand out as being there and being on purpose. I'm going to add some more color to this, and then I will pause and finish it, and I will come back to you to pull the collagraph print. The last thing I want to say is, because some of this shows up, like my marker lines show up, I want to use a directional pull, a line quality that makes sense. So if I'm doing a tree, for example, I'm pulling the marker up the tree so that when the lines show, they look like the bark that's up and down the tree. If I'm doing the sky, I'm going to go horizontal because the horizontal feel will kind of pull the sky flat. You don't want vertical lines in your sky, it doesn't look right. So let me work on this a little bit and I'll be right back to you. Okay, so I have put more colors on here. Let me get this screen right. And you can see that some of it is like, beaded up and some of it is flat, but it's all colored. I tried to get in between my branches and around my clouds. And now it's time for me to wet the paper and pull a collagraph print from the ink that's on the marker. So I have my fresh water container, I have my brush, and the goal here is not to saturate the paper. Super wet paper will make a mess. The goal is to dampen the paper so that it will grab the marker. Now, I want to make sure you know that your marker can dry and still work. It isn't the fact that the marker is wet that's doing this, because the water in the paper will be enough to sort of reactivate that. That's why it's beneficial that it's a washable marker. A permanent marker, as soon as it's dry, is permanent. And with a lot of permanent markers, that's almost immediately. So you don't have any time to get a print out of that. But with what we're doing, it's going to work. So the amount of water I use matters. The amount of pigment I have on my project matters. And then I still might not like it. I did a couple earlier, and the green that I had for the grass was really just, it was almost neon, and it didn't work with the other colors in the print, and I didn't like it. So, you know, it requires playing around a little bit. Try and get this damp the whole way. If you wet it too much, you can just sort of, fan it like this and let it dry a little bit. And the damp side is the one that you really should put down. Like when I lift this up, I can tell that both sides are wet, but the one side is definitely damper than the other. And that's going to be the one that has a little bit more ability to grab the pigment. If you rip this paper in the process of wetting it, you can put it in the trash and get another one. You're not going to get a good print from it, but you'll learn that it's just too much pressure, right? You want to be gentle with wet paper because it's very fragile. All right, so put this down here, get my damp side down, and once I put this in place, I really cannot move it. If I slide it, and students, you know that from making a print with me in class, if I slide it, I will ruin the print. So take a minute before you fully commit, because once it's down, that is it. So now, I don't know that you can really see this, but I can tell that something's coming through because I can see that it's coming through. And that's good news. And I'm going to kind of press lightly on all areas to make sure that they all make contact with the paper. Don't pull, right? You're going to rip it. Don't do it. Because at this point, if you rip your paper, you will have to remarker your project. Because the marker is already on a lot of your paper. All right, so let's see what I get. Not bad. Let's flip this up and talk about it. Okay, so this is a collagraph print with the marker. I like it. I like it quite a bit. If it's still damp, if your paper is still damp, when you step away to go, have your tasty lunch or whatever, you're going to come back and your marker will have spread out a little bit more, bleeding across the paper because the moisture isn't dry. So if that bothers you a lot, I would say trying to dry this quickly is not a bad idea. Fanning it, if you're going to use a hairdryer, go super gentle, right? You'll blow a hole right through it. Don't do that. Just to try to get it to dry a little faster, because the faster it dries, the less your marker color is going to spread out. And don't stop at one. This is fun, right? So color it up again and make another, and color it a different way and make another one. Especially just to see how mixing the color helps, or changing the mood of the whole piece with different colors, or layering it, right? This is totally up to you. And each time you do, it's going to be different than the last one. So enjoy this. Okay, so let's talk about the watercolor option. Doing both is a great idea, right? You have this basis for the design. If you have both materials, do both. Why not? So let me tell you a couple things that I have learned from doing a couple of these watercolors. First, students, actually. Watercolor is meant to be a very free-flowing paint. And in my classroom, we would use a lot of water and a little bit of pigment, and we would let the colors play on the paper. This is not that assignment. Less is more when it comes to the water. Turns out, wet tinfoil, bad idea. Extra water, bad idea. Very wet paper, bad idea. Okay, so for your watercolors, I have my watercolor as my brush. A smaller brush worked better because I was able to get into the little crevices and apply the paint there. Dry tinfoil is great, and when I do put the brush in the water, I get the excess water off. Okay, I don't want to use a lot of water. Now I've already spritzed my watercolors to kind of wake them up. Students, you might remember that step. You wet the watercolors to kind of get them going. And you should only do that once. And on here, I have done some of the green, some of the blue, some of the yellow. I'm just going to demonstrate a little bit while you're watching, but you shouldn't have to really watch me do the whole thing. So a little bit of water on the brush, excess off, and then just to point this out, this part of the tray here, this is for color mixing. So a lot of times I was putting colors down, like the green is like a really green. That's not really my jam. I want it to be a little bit more neutral. So I have a little gray and a little orange in here, and that way I can tap that more interesting color on, and it doesn't have to come out like a very primary colored project, because those colors are a little too bright for me, for nature. Now, getting this edge with a darker color is a great idea. I really did tap on some black for some of mine, and I'm just squeegeeing off the water. And I'm gonna do, let's work on this tray. So I'll have a little bit of this gray, and I'll kind of pull it across here. When the tissue paper, not the tissue paper, when the tinfoil was fresh, I don't know why this gray makes that squeaking noise, but it does make me insane. I'm sorry. It beat it up a lot. After a couple attempts at watercolor, I started to get this like film over the tinfoil where the watercolor held on better. It also helped a lot having the tinfoil be dry and the brush be as dry as possible. Like the extra paint just was not helpful. The extra water, I mean. Sorry. It's hard to talk and do this at the same time. But I'm getting every tree limb. And when I was going in with the sky, I went in between every tree limb. I'm not trying to leave areas blank because they won't show up at all in the print. It'll just be white empty space on a white piece of paper, and that doesn't help define your image at all. So I'll work a little bit of black in here. And once again, I'm going to go to every single spot that I want this to be, because it's not going to like move around on its own. Now I just made a mistake and I touched these two places with my fingers, so I got to put some pigment back on that. And then I'll tap a little bit of black along this edge. I don't normally like a black outline, but I've been noticing that it comes up pretty cool on this particular project. Now, you might be looking at this tinfoil and saying there's nothing on it. It does look that way. But there is something on it, and it shows up when you print it on the white paper. That being said, it's very light. So if you want this to be dark, saturated pigment, you're going to have to work at it. You're going to have to apply a couple layers of dry paint until you can get it about as dark as you can. Alright, I'm going to switch over to do a little bit of the cloud. I'll finish the rest of this and then I'll show you how to pull the print. So let's get a little bit, I think purple for these clouds. See how it's beating up? It's still kind of wet. And actually the purple was beating up on my other versions too. Let me see if I can get more on there. There, that's starting to stay put. Alright, let me pause this here, finish this, just getting some colors on here, and I will pull the print with you watching. Okay, so you can probably see that I got some more pigment on here. I got the right ratio of water to pigment when I was painting, and it started to take. And then I got some fresh water here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to slide this over, and I want to wet my paper. So same process as with the marker. You want to have an even distribution of water across the whole piece of paper. You don't want it, saturated, but you do want it damp. And I switched to a slightly bigger brush than the one I was using for the watercolor because I wanted to work a little bit faster and distribute a little bit more water. Well, you don't want one part of the paper to dry while you're working the other part, so quick is good. And then when you put this down, you want to put the damp, wet side down. Same as with the marker, when you put it down, you cannot move it. If you move it, you will distort your print. So this is my damp side, and here is my project. I am going to put this down and not move it. Let me see if I can kind of line it up. And there. Put it on here, give it a little tap. I have this to sort of help. I'm pushing down. Like you do know, if you pull on a wet piece of paper, you could rip it really easy. It's in a really fragile state. After it dries, it goes back to being strong again, but you have to wait. All right, let's see. I want to get into all these little spots because if the paper doesn't touch if the wet paper doesn't touch the watercolor, it won't pull the color up onto the paper. So you really have to get all areas. Now if you have areas that aren't grabbing, you can take your brush and sort of dampen them a little bit and apply a little bit of pressure to sort of pull. Let me see if I can show you. Little bit of water, little bit. Little. And then you would sort of just put it in the exact spots that aren't coming through. You just don't want to do this for the whole thing. Like if you put water over the whole thing once the paper's already down, it really is too much water and you really will have a blurry print. Now if you want a blurry print, go to town. If this is a nice piece of watercolor paper or sketchbook paper that you're using and it can hold up, fantastic. You might get a really cool print that way. But if you're doing it on computer paper like me and you use too much water, it's just not going to really look good. All right, but I think I've got something here, so let's just lift up and take a look. Okay. You know what? I know I'm being a little finicky, but all right, let's see. Ooh, it's pretty. All right, so now that I have
the video.
Oh, hi, honey. My son wants to go play building Legos. Hold on one second. I'm still videoing.
Okay.
Now that I have a sample print from the watercolor, you'll let it dry, and then when it's curled up, which it probably will be, you will be able to flatten it out under a book or something after it's dry. And then, make another. I've made a couple. This is the one I just pulled for you, of course. This was another one that I did earlier. And then I had a couple that were, mistakes. Like this one did not grab enough pigment. And some of these turned out nice, but very light. And so I needed to apply more pigment. So you'll get the hang of this, and you'll work until you get a good watercolor print, a collagraph. And then we'll be moving on to phase 3. We'll put some permanent markers on your design and turn it into a wall hanging. So once again, don't get rid of your design.